Sunny remained motionless for a few moments, then hissed quietly, which made it feel as though his throat was being sawed open by tens of dull, rusty knives. His head was once again attached to his neck. However, that didn't mean that he felt fine. In fact, although he had avoided becoming a corpse, he still felt like one.
Your shadow grows stronger.
The dark dungeon suddenly grew quiet. Saint must have finished off the last of the caged nightmare creatures, turning him and Alias into the last surviving captives of the Red Colosseum. No matter what happened from now on, the ghastly trials were over. Sunny sensed a bit of shadow essence pour into his cores, replenishing the empty reserves a little, and scowled. That wasn't much. The young awakened had wasted all of his essence while healing Sunny as well. The two of them were not going to survive if they had to fight a prolonged battle. So, they needed to flee the Colosseum swiftly, and before the rest of the warmongers noticed their escape. Gritting his teeth, Sunny staggered and rose to his feet. Then, threw a somber glance at Alias, who was staring at him with wide eyes. The youth still had a collar wrapped around his neck. However, there was not much Sunny could do about that right now. It was not like he could behead the young awakened too. Hopefully, his strength alone was going to be enough to deliver them both away from this cursed place. Now that he was connected to the spell and had access to all of his power, there were a lot of things that could be done. The damned zealots were going to regret ever capturing him. Elias opened his mouth, then asked in a shaking voice,
"Demon, how are you still alive? I saw your head. It was completely off your body. It was on the ground and..."
Sunny raised a finger to silence the panicking youth. He then tilted his head, grimaced, and made a mental note not to move his neck too much in the future. Then, without moving his head down, he looked at Elias and gestured at his breastplate of the undying chain. The young awakened frowned.
Your armor? It's a relic? Wait, where did you even get this fearsome armor? And all these magical weapons?"
Sunny sighed, then nodded and pointed at his chest again. Elias blinked a couple of times.
"What do you mean? They were inside of you all along? Why have you not used them in the arena then?"
One of the demon's hands rose and pointed at the collar that now lay harmlessly on the filthy stones. The youth frowned.
"Oh, I see. The war god's binding must have hidden you from the sight of the Lord of Shadows and robbed you of his blessings. But then..."
Sunny sighed and pressed a finger against his lips, commanding Alias to be quiet. At the same time, Saint appeared from the darkness, drops of fetid black blood still dripping from the blade of the great Odichi. Her gaze was calm and indifferent, as always. The youth stared at the taciturn demon for a few moments, then bowed respectfully.
You have my gratitude for coming to our aid, venerable Lady Shade."
Saint looked at the young man, her placid face not showing a single glimmer of an opinion about being addressed in such a peculiar manner. Sunny shook his head and sighed.
Poor fool must be thinking that she is another shadow creature that came to rescue her kin. Me, that is. And judging by this reaction, he also seems to be convinced that she is my senior in the hierarchy of shadows. What the hell? Why are teenagers always convinced that Saint is cooler than me?
Unfortunately, he had no time to disabuse the youth of this misconception, though. There was some escaping that still needed to be done. A scorched kite shield manifested itself from sparks of light in Saint's hand, and at the same time, the soul serpent turned into a stream of flowing darkness. and reformed itself into a straight, double-edged sword. This one akin to the weapon the graceful knight had wielded in the past. Sonny hesitated for a moment, then pushed the hilt of the Midnight Shard into Elias's hands. Holding the cruel sight in one of his own, he bent down and picked up the terrifying heavy blade of the Red Priest with the upper pair. Sonny didn't know what exact enchantments the two-handed cleaver possessed, but since it had managed to slice through his adamantine spine without too much trouble, they had to be exceptionally powerful. Then, he took a deep breath and sent his shadows forth. Along the familiar corridors of the underground part of the Colosseum and beyond them, to find a way to freedom. Sonny was good enough in a fight to survive in the arena and even earn the love and admiration of the damned lunatics who spectated the slaughter and worshipped it. But his true calling was to remain hidden in the darkness, move unseen, and strike at unsuspecting enemies from the shadows to kill them in one fell blow. The task of escaping the Red Colosseum unnoticed was much easier for him than that of conquering it. As all three shadows glided into the darkness, the skin of the four-armed demon he inhabited turned from obsidian black to pale gray once again, and Sonny swayed, sensing his strength and resilience vastly diminish. He gritted his teeth and then gestured for Elias to follow. While Saint disappeared into the darkness, the two of them headed toward the exit from the dungeon. They walked through the silent corridors, sensing the cold wind blow past, washing the stench of the dungeon off their aching bodies. Since it was night, and the battles were not supposed to continue until morning, the Colosseum was mostly empty, devoid of the jubilant crowds that filled it during the day. Here and there, Sonny and Elias still encountered the warmongers, those who, perhaps, had duties to maintain, like cleaning and preparing the arena for the next day's slaughter. However, no one they saw was in any condition to stop their flight. From the carnage, it was clear each of them had already met Saint. Following in the wake of the taciturn demon, the two of them found only corpses. The followers of war had been killed ruthlessly and noiselessly, each requiring just one strike. With each dead, Sonny's reserves of essence were replenished a bit more, but more importantly than that, the path to freedom was clear. Finally, after something that felt like an eternity, Sonny found his three shadows waiting silently before a small wooden door. He lingered for a second, and then pushed it open. In front of him, there was a vast green meadow, and beyond it, nothing but boundless, vast starlit sky. The dawn was approaching, which meant they didn't have a lot of time left. Sonny and Elias had to leave the cursed island of the Red Colosseum before the night ended and the crowds of war god worshippers arrived to spectate the sacrificial slaughter on the blood-soaked arena. Once they were elsewhere, pursuing them would be much harder, not only because the ancient magic of the Demon of Desire would remain far behind them, but also because the warmongers would have to split their forces to search all the neighboring isles. The further the two of them escaped, the wider net their pursuers would have to throw. By then, the zealots would have to deal with the crushing as well. Sonny wasn't familiar with the western reaches of the Chained Isles, which belonged to the followers of war, since he had never traveled in this direction before. They could try to escape northeast, toward the Hollow Mountains and the Night Temple, but that region was unfamiliar to him as well. Directly to the east, and a long distance off, lay the Ivory City, where Elias hailed from, and the Prison of Hope. However, the eastern direction would be where the pursuers were most likely to concentrate their search, since running toward the domain of their enemies, the Sun God's people, would have been the safest choice. After hesitating for a few seconds, Sunny pulled the young awakened toward the southern edge of the Red Island. If they journeyed southeast, they would eventually reach the ruined fortress where he had once welcomed Effie and Kai. Of course, Sunny wasn't even sure if the fortress would actually be ruined yet in this ancient time. Either way, the influence of the war faction was bound to be severely diminished there. More importantly, that was the boundary to the part of Hope's shattered kingdom that Sunny knew and had explored before. Before the start of the nightmare, he and the other members of the cohort had agreed to travel to the Iron Hand Island should they be separated. Sunny would be able to easily find his way there from the southern Great Chain that anchored the isles to the mainland beneath. Hidden in the darkness, Sunny and Elias ran across the meadow, aiming to reach the edge of the island and one of the heavenly chains that rattled below from time to time. Disturbed by the turbulent winds of the border between the two skies.
Come on, come on.
Once they were over the edge, Sunny could summon the heavenly burden and the dark wing to carry them to the chain, or even hide them in the darkness of the sky below for a while. Their salvation was so close. It was already just a few meters away. But then, his heart suddenly grew cold.
No.
In the end, it wasn't close enough. Just as they reached the edge, a quiet sigh resounded from the darkness, and suddenly, Sunny was laying on the ground. His vision blurred and his whole body numb. There was no oxygen in his lungs, and no matter how hard he tried to inhale, it was of no use. His chest seemed to be on fire. A few seconds of agony later, the shock of the terrifying impact that had cracked the breastplate of the undying chain and sent him flying to the ground began to fade, and Sunny was able to finally draw in a hoarse, desperate breath.
Curses.
He moved his arm, reaching for the hilt of the Red Priest's cleaver that lay near, buried in the soft grass. However, before his fingers closed around it, a delicate foot stepped on his wrist. And suddenly, it was as though the weight of a whole world descended upon him. Sunny groaned, then gritted his teeth and looked up at the harrowing creature that had attacked them from beyond the edge of the island. It was a graceful, breathtaking beauty, wearing a simple red tunic. Her face, tender and solemn, her dazzling eyes shining like two silver stars. Solvain looked down at him and smiled with sadness.
I am afraid this is as far as you go. We meet again, Child of Shadows.
Sunny stared at the beautiful saint, with grim resentment burning in his black tenumbrous eyes. He remained motionless, knowing that his worst fear had just come true. The transcendent immortal herself had arrived to hunt them down. He thought feverishly, trying to come up with some way to escape the priestess of war. Soul Serpent and Saint were still hiding in his shadow, so he could command them to attack. But what could an awakened and an ascended demon do against a transcendent? An undying one that was chosen by the gods and had lived for at least 1,000 years, no less. No. Sending them to fight that horror would be just sending them to their deaths. In all of his travels, Sunny had never met a creature more frightening than Solvain. Of that, he was sure. Even the corrupted leviathans of the Dark Sea had not instilled such caution in him. Maybe only the harrowing rot in the Ebony Tower had, but he hesitated to call it a living being. Then, what? What was he supposed to do?
Damn you. Damn you, fate. You never let go of your prey, do you?
Sunny gritted his teeth, then growled and tried to strike at Solvain with the cruel sight. However, the beautiful woman simply swatted it away, breaking his fingers and sending the somber blade flying over the edge of the island. She shook her head.
No, not like that, little demon. You deserve a better end.
Then, Sonny felt himself being lifted into the air and then thrown to his knees. A moment later, a stifled scream announced that Elias too had not escaped the immortal transcendent. His gaunt figure fell near him, a pained grimace contorting the young man's face. Soon, the unassailable power that pressed Sonny into the ground disappeared, and he was able to breathe again. Looking up, he saw Solvain standing in front of them, her silken skin caressed by the gentle starlight. She looked at them with an inexplicable expression, her long chestnut hair dancing softly in the wind.
There has to be something I can do. Think.
The transcendent priestess smiled, the world itself growing brighter from her mesmerizing smile.
The trials of life are over. I congratulate you, champions. Although some of your foes were vanquished under the cover of darkness instead of in the bright light of day, under the gaze of the gods, you have defeated them nevertheless. You have even slain one of my blessed. Thank you. Thank you for giving that which I was unable to. You have my gratitude, both of you.
Sonny stared at the beautiful saint, frozen in place. Despite all the hatred he harbored against the monstrous priestess, despite how much he wanted to pay her back 100-fold for all the suffering she had caused him, he couldn't help but forget his anger and be enchanted by her beauty. Solvain was just too splendid, too lovely. Her eyes were too lustrous, her smile too charming, her soft lips too alluring. This woman was created to be worshipped, for men to wage wars in hope of earning the right to stand by her side.
Snap out of it, you idiot! Have you not seen beautiful things before? Beautiful things are always the deadliest.
Sonny bit his lip, allowing his sharp fangs to pierce it. Pain sobered him up somewhat. Beside him, Elias was staring at Solvain with grim eyes. Strangely, the young man did not seem to be affected by her transcendent beauty at all. It was understandable. After all, his whole family had been slaughtered by the followers and on the orders of the dazzling priestess. Meanwhile, something appeared in Solvain's hands. It was a small object that made Sonny's eyes narrow. Suddenly, his breathing became quicker. The saint sighed and stretched her hand forward. A simple knife, carved out of a single piece of wood, laying on her open palm.
The trials of life are over, and so I offer you this gift and the right to fight for your freedom, to struggle for your life, as life is an eternal struggle. Will you accept, champions? Will you take this wooden blade and wield it? It is all I can give you.
Sonny's heart skipped a beat.
I'll be damned.
The fairy tale about a wooden sword Elias had once shared with him had actually, inexplicably, turned out to be true. And more than that, Sonny recognized the sword instantly. He had already held that wooden knife once, a long time ago. Far, far in the future. This was the knife he had killed Solvain with. Sonny stared at the wooden knife, suffocating pain still radiating from the spot where Solvain had hit him. The Transcendent was so fast that he had not even seen or sensed her strike. Not that it mattered anymore. As he studied the familiar blade, different pieces of knowledge suddenly clicked together, revealing a chilling truth. Stunned by the grim revelation, Sonny shuddered.
Of course.
Finally, the purpose of the Red Colosseum made sense to him. The cruelty of the trials, the perverse faith of the zealous warriors, their worship of struggle, battle, and death. The tale of a wooden blade that granted the champion a chance to win their freedom. When he looked back, it all seemed so obvious. The strange cult of war that had blossomed on the ruins of the Kingdom of Hope was built around the tenet of glory. Glory was both the highest virtue and the highest of honors, and it could only be won by prevailing against overwhelming odds. Through mortal struggle, which was the essence of life and war as far as these zealots were concerned. So, they enslaved a horde of abominations and threw themselves against it, fighting to the death against their slaves in the arena. With each battle, the weak were slaughtered, and the strong got to live and fight against more powerful enemies the next day, all under the beaming gazes of the jubilant crowd. Those who died perished in the pursuit of glory, and those who lived came closer and closer to earning it. That was the sacrificial ritual the followers of war performed every decade or so, spilling blood in the name of their glorious dream. However, there was one problem with this deranged arrangement, a glaring flaw that made the trials of the Red Colosseum seem futile, hollow, and senseless. What was the end to all this? Was everyone participating in the battle destined to die? Would there be no victor? What happened to the person or creature left standing at the very end, devoid of enemies to struggle against? Where was their glory? Now, looking at the wooden knife that contained Solvain's death, freely offered to them by the immortal Transcendent herself, Sonny finally understood everything. The last champion would indeed be gifted a wooden blade, and a chance to fight for their freedom. Just like Elias had learned from the fairy tales in the Ivory City, they just had to overcome one last enemy. And that enemy was Solvain herself. This whole feverish hell, the Red Colosseum, the blood-soaked arena, the cult of murderous glory she had built, existed for one single purpose: to find, or rather create, a warrior capable of killing their saint. Eternal Solvain, undefeated Solvain, wanted to die. The madness of this nightmare was born out of the 1,000 years of immortality the beautiful priestess had endured, out of the desire to be free of her eternal duty as Hope's warden. However, Solvain didn't just want to die. She wanted to die a glorious death, one worthy of a true servant of war. Or rather, she simply could not allow herself to give up. Giving up without struggle was a sin against her faith, her God, and her conviction. So, the beautiful Transcendent could only allow herself to die if she was defeated. That was her goal. Finding someone valiant enough to kill her was Solvain's most ardent hope, her deepest desire. Feeling a hint of vague suspicion, Sonny frowned. He was certain that he was right, that his reasoning and insight were correct, but at the same time, there was still something out of place. Something still didn't make sense. He just couldn't say what. And there was no time to think. Solvain was still offering them the wooden knife and a chance to save their lives. All they had to do was take it. And win. But he wasn't fooled. Her offer might have seemed like a gift, but it was just a death sentence. Sure, the knife contained a death, Solvain's death, and would be able to slay her with one strike. At this point, Sonny was certain that there had been 7 knives once. each meant to kill one of the 7 immortals created by the Lord of Light, and this one, the wooden knife, was meant to kill Solvayne. However, taking it was only going to spell their doom. Wooden blade or not, the beautiful priestess was still a transcendent, a servant of war with 1,000 years of battle experience, an ancient warrior who had fought and triumphed in too many battles to count. And despite her desire to be defeated, she certainly wasn't going to just throw this fight. Giving in without struggling with all her might was against Solvayne's conviction. She may want to lose deep down, but that didn't change the most obvious fact. Fighting against her was clearly suicide. By his side, Elias's pupils widened dangerously. Feeling a small change in his partner's posture, Sonny shifted and glanced at him.
What? What is this fool trying to do?
The youth gritted his teeth and then slowly rose to his feet. His tattered tunic had long ago lost any remnant of its once pure white color and was now hanging like rags on his gaunt, emaciated body. Despite that, the young awakened looked full of resolve and determination, his eyes glinting with grim purpose.
What are you doing? No, you fool!
Despite the pain in his throat, Sonny growled loudly, trying to warn Elias of how fatal his actions were, but his call fell on deaf ears.
Damn it! Why can't I talk?
For the first time since he had entered the nightmare, Sonny felt truly desperate to speak. But he couldn't. The demon's body robbed him of the ability to converse with humans in any meaningful way. Panicking, he made a move to stand up, hoping to grab the youth before the fool made a lethal mistake. But the pressure Solvayne had exerted on him was back, paralyzing the body of the 4-armed shadow creature. He groaned, suddenly unable to move, and struggled to even keep his head up. Elias stood and looked at the knife. His fingers twitched as he raised his hand to take it. Then, he stopped and looked back towards Sonny. In his large demon body, Sonny tried everything he could to communicate with the boy. He tried to physically will his animal lips into the shapes necessary to form human words. He tried to furrow his animal brow in a way that would be recognizable as a human expression. But it didn't work. He couldn't tell the youth that this choice would seal his doom. Just as Sonny was about to try and roar as loudly as possible, he caught a glimpse of something in Elias's eyes, and his heart sank like a stone. The situation was even worse than he'd first thought. It wasn't that Elias didn't understand him. It was that Elias didn't care. The warrior boy smiled at him.
Sorry, demon. This is something I need to do.
Deep down, Sonny knew there was no way he could stop him. Elias stood in front of Solvayne, looking at the wooden knife in her outstretched hand. He was about to make a decision that would lead inevitably to his death, and there was nothing Sonny could do to stop him. Elias hesitated for a moment, and then looked at Sonny with a sad smile.
It's all right, demon. Thank you. Thank you for getting us this far. But now, it's my turn. This is our chance. This is what we've been fighting for all this time, is it not? The tales my mother told me were true. I'll free us both. You'll see. The Lord of Light will guide my hand.
With that, he reached out and took the wooden knife from Solvayne's hand. His fingers wrapped tightly around its hilt. The priestess smiled radiantly and took a step back. Her beautiful eyes shone with joy, and her voice resounded in the darkness of the dying night, full of longing and hope.
Be brave, boy. The gods are watching.
Sonny struggled desperately against the crushing force that pressed him into the ground, but it was of no use. A stifled roar escaped from his mouth. A few steps away, Elias straightened, calmly looked the transcendent beauty in the eyes, and then assumed a battle stance. He knew what he was doing. After all, the youth was as talented a fighter as Sonny had been at his age, perhaps even better. 2 months of constant battles in the arena had given him plenty of experience, more than most would have acquired in a lifetime, and certainly no less than what Sonny had on the Forgotten Shore.
No, that's not enough. You're not ready.
But what if Sonny was wrong? What if Elias really had a chance? Sonny had achieved many impossible things himself time after time, and he'd seen others do the same as well. Even in the direst of situations, there was always hope. That was a lesson he had learned against all odds in the hell that was the Forgotten Shore, and later, in the stone mausoleum of the Night Temple. Whatever the case, there was nothing Sonny could do. Elias's decision had already been made, and now the battle would begin. Without wasting any time on doubt and hesitation, Elias sent his soul essence flowing in a raging flood and shot forward, moving with grace and speed that few awakened could ever hope to achieve. His hand flew through the air, swift enough to appear as an almost imperceptible blur. The strike was swift and cunning. However, it was just a feint. His true intention was to attack from below, and it was hidden almost perfectly. There was no sign of the fact that the young man was preparing to change the direction of his blow. He had learned well from watching Sonny fight. But if Sonny could see it, then so could Solvain. His eyes narrowed. A split second before the wooden knife reached the Transcendent's flesh, Elias suddenly stumbled, then slowed down. Taking a few unsteady steps forward, he swayed and suddenly toppled to the ground. A thin red line appeared across his chest and then burst open in a flood of blood. Above him, Solvain sighed with sorrow and lowered her hand, a single drop of crimson falling from her delicate fingers. Her lips trembled, and then a barely audible whisper reached Sonny's ears. Not today. He didn't hear it, though. Frozen, Sonny stared at Elias, who lay motionlessly on the ground, the grass soaking in his blood. The young man's unmoving face was turned to him, his light blue eyes still open. However, those eyes, which had been bright and lively once, were now dull and empty, reflecting the boundless darkness of the night sky. Elias's face seemed almost peaceful. The youth was finally free. Sonny roared, struggling furiously to stand up. But all he achieved was damaging his mangled body even further. Without paying any attention to that pain, he continued fighting against the invisible chains holding him down, feeling the ground itself shift beneath his knees.
Kill her! I'll kill her! I'll rip her to shreds!
Solvain remained motionless for a while, and then silently bent down to pick up the wooden knife from the youth's bloodless fingers. Coming closer, she stared at Sonny with a dark expression, and then asked, "What about you? Are you willing to fight me, little demon?" Sonny glared at her, his teeth bared in a hateful grin. He wanted to. Oh, how he wanted to. But he could not. Fighting Solvain meant nothing but death. Slowly, He shook his head. The beautiful priestess sighed. Of course. Why did I expect something different from the servant of the cowardly shadow? Her hand suddenly flashed, and a terrible pain exploded through Sunny's body. Looking down in a morbid déjà vu, he saw a graceful arm protruding from his chest. The breastplate of the undying chain shattered into pieces. Solvain grimaced and pulled her hand out of his broken chest, easily tearing the still beating heart out in the process. She glanced at it with disappointment and then sent the body of the four-armed demon tumbling over the edge of the island. The last thing he saw before plummeting into the abyss was her graceful, beautiful figure standing forlornly in the tall grass. Then, Sunny fell into the embrace of darkness. His body flew down, faster and faster, quickly disappearing into the nothingness of the sky below. Soon, it was so far away from the Red Island that even a memory of sunlight couldn't reach that far. His chest was torn open, and his heart was violently ripped from it, leaving behind a harrowing wound. After falling for a while, Sunny sighed. Luckily, this strange body of his had two hearts, and while anyone else would have succumbed to blood loss after having one destroyed, he possessed Bloodweave, which kept him alive despite receiving such a ghastly wound. It didn't feel too good, though. In fact, the pain was terrible. But it could not compare even a little to the anguish he felt in his soul. Sunny closed his eyes. I'm sorry, Elias. I failed. But don't worry. I'll kill her on your behalf. One day. I'll kill her again. I'll kill her as many times as it takes to erase the very memory of her from existence. Just you wait. He gritted his teeth, then summoned the heavenly burden, and then thrust the black needle into his flesh. Darkwing appeared on his shoulders, swiftly turning into a blur. Sunny's fall slowed, then slowed some more, and finally turned into flight. He was flying into the darkness, moving further and further away from the Red Colosseum. Far above, the eastern horizon had already turned pale lilac, announcing the arrival of a new day. Eventually, Sunny returned to the altitude where the dark undersides of the floating islands could be seen. Exhausted, he slowly approached one, sensed something moving in the deep shadows, and glided past without coming too close. The next one didn't seem to harbor any horrors. He flew toward the rough stone surface and sunk his claws and talons into it, clinging to the bottom of the island like a bat. Strangely, Sunny did not need to exert any conscious effort to remain in that position, and simply lay upside down on the cold stones for a while, struggling against exhaustion. He was in much worse shape than it had seemed before. 2 months of ruthless battles in the Red Colosseum had taken a toll on his body, and the terrible wound in his chest was still there, sapping him of strength and vitality. With the help of Bloodweave, this body of a four-armed demon had managed to survive having one of its 2 hearts violently torn out, but that didn't mean that it was going to fully recover from that vicious injury. After all, this body had 2 hearts for a reason. It needed both, and with only one left to pump blood through his veins, Sunny felt lethargic and weak. That weakness would probably never go away, not unless he somehow managed to find or grow a new heart. He was tired to the bone, overwhelmed by pain and numb. Terribly, utterly numb. After the harrowing intensity of the past 2 months, and the crushing strain of their disastrous attempt to escape, Sonny finally reached safety and found himself drained of all thoughts and emotions. He couldn't muster enough energy to feel joy or relief, grief or sorrow, even anger or hatred. Tired. He was just too tired. The island under which Sonny had hid was separated from the Red Colosseum by 4 or 5 heavenly chains. It was far to the south. Sonny was still deep within the territory of the followers of war, but no one was going to discover him. Not unless they had wings. And even then, finding the Child of Shadows in the cold embrace of darkness was not going to be easy. Besides, no one was looking. After all, Solvayne and anyone else would assuredly assume he was dead. Sonny looked at the shattered breastplate of the Undying Chain, and then dismissed the damaged armor to give it a chance to repair itself. Then, he summoned the mantle of the underworld and gasped when its onyx metal wrapped itself around his mangled chest. The intricate black armor embraced his tortured body, soothing its aches. Sonny doubted that anyone from the real world would be able to spy on him here, in the depths of a nightmare. But even if they could, he didn't care anymore. He just wanted to be safe and protected. As soon as the fearsome mantle hid his wounds, Sonny closed his weary eyes and plunged into the nothingness of a deep, dreamless sleep. Thirst and pain. Those were the first things Sonny felt before slowly remembering who he was, what he was, and where he had found himself. He was in hell. Where else?
I fell asleep.
He opened his eyes and saw the rough surface of the bare stone in front of him. Sonny was still clinging to the underside of the island, his claws buried deep into it and holding him in place like iron pitons. He felt better, somewhat at least. His body was still a churning labyrinth of blood and injury, but the pain was much milder than before. Judging by the state of his wounds, he had slept for many, many days. No wonder he was so thirsty. Sonny shifted slightly and freed one of his 4 hands, then summoned the endless spring and drank a few gulps of water. Then, he turned his head and stared into the darkness, indifferent to everything. His body was healing, but his mind was still empty and numb, exhausted of its ability to feel anything. All that remained was cold rationality. But even that part of him was dull and apathetic, devoid of any interest and desire. He just didn't care about anything or anyone right now. The mere thought of caring seemed exhausting. After a while, Sonny sighed.
What should I do?
Despite everything that happened, his immediate goal remained simple and straightforward. He had to traverse the whole Kingdom of Hope and reach the Iron Hand Island to regroup with the cohort. Once they were together, if the others were still alive, they would know what to do. Sonny didn't feel particularly motivated to attempt that perilous journey, but he knew that he had to. It was a simple enough objective, at least. In his current state, he felt reluctant to think about anything even slightly more arduous, obtuse, or complicated. All he had to do was move southeast for a while, and then turn north. Maybe his condition would improve by the time he reached the eastern edges of the Chained Isles. The road, however, was not going to be easy. Sonny was going to have to sneak through the vast territory of the warmongers without being seen, reach the southernmost boundary of the region, and then retrace the path he had once taken to welcome Effie and Kai almost all the way back to the sanctuary of Noctis. Of course, it was also unclear who ruled the eastern territories in this era, or if they were wild and overrun by nightmare creatures like they would be in the future. He grimaced, remained motionless for a while, and then summoned the covetous coffer. Catching the frightened box before it plummeted into the sky below, Sonny freed one more hand and took a handful of synth paste tubes out of the coffer, then dismissed it. Consuming the tasteless sludge to replenish his strength, he summoned the runes and finally took a proper look at them for the first time in months.
Name, Sunless. True name, Lost from Light. Rank, Awakened. Class, Demon. Shadow Cores, 3 out of 7. Shadow Fragments.
His pupils narrowed.
What?
But there was no mistake. The runes read,
Shadow Fragments, 2,223 out of 3,000.
Sonny stared at the number, then hung his head back and tried to chuckle, producing a disturbing bestial snarl instead. His throat pulsed with sharp pain, but he shrugged it off and bared his teeth in a dark, bitter grin. When entering the nightmare, Sonny had less than 300 fragments collected, which meant that he had accumulated almost 2,000 of them in the Red Colosseum. In fact, in those 2 months, he had probably slaughtered more nightmare creatures, as well as humans, than in the previous 2 years combined. It was more than the rest of his whole life as a carrier of the spell. He shook his head and thought about all those horrible fools screaming and cheering from the stands of the Colosseum, how they'd gone crazy over each of his many barbarous acts. He thought of his broken body, of the death he'd seen, of the fallen warrior boy, Elias, and then he thought of his winnings. Was all that horror the price of glory? Sonny remained motionless for a while, then shifted his gaze, moving it to the very end of the field of shimmering runes. Soon, Neff's description appeared before him. He lingered for a few moments, and then read,
Soul Fragments, 2,478 out of 4,000.
The corner of his mouth twitched.
Of course. She is in a hell of her own after all.
The gap between them had diminished, but barely. He was still behind, still lacking. But she was alive at least, and fighting with all her strength to return. If Neff still refused to give up, then he would have to persevere too. With a sigh, Sonny turned away and looked back to his runes. Finding the list of his memories and echoes, his eyes suddenly gleamed, but then grew dark and slightly despondent.
What the hell? How is this even possible?
Among the names of his memories, dozens of new ones shimmered in the darkness. It seemed that the spell had continued to reward him even while their connection was obstructed by the sorceries of hope. It sort of made sense. The fact that Sonny had not been able to communicate with the spell did not mean that it hadn't continued to watch his every step. He was inside one of its nightmares after all, which created a swarm of questions on its own. Not having nearly the energy to consider those questions, Sonny instead silently counted the new memories. 39. There were 39 of them. And yet, there was not a single echo he had received after slaughtering nearly 1,000 nightmare creatures. Not even a hint of one.
Well, that doesn't make any sense. None at all. What is this, a joke?
It seemed that while his luck with memories had been incredible, his luck with echoes had been beyond terrible. He should have received 4 or 5, at least, but he hadn't gotten a single one. Sonny stared into the darkness for a while, his expression glum. Then he sighed.
It doesn't matter. It's a pity that I didn't receive an echo of the Red Priest, though. I would have made him into a shadow, just to get a chance to kill that bastard again.
He studied his new memories, slowly reading their names and descriptions. A few were good, and a couple were splendid. The rest, however, were worse than what he already had in his arsenal. Their only use was to feed Saint. This time, however, he did not hurry to give them away as sustenance for the taciturn demon. Instead, Sonny hesitated for a long time, and then dismissed the runes. He had other plans for these memories. Each of them possessed a unique weave, one that he would be able to study and experiment with while not risking any damage to any valuable instrument. He would be able to use Weaver's needle now, too, instead of cutting his fingers on the ethereal, but perfectly sharp strings. Satisfied with that decision, Sonny finished the last of synth paste tubes he had taken out of the covetous coffer, indifferently dropped them into the dark abyss of the sky below, and sent one of his shadows to scout out the situation above. The sun was rolling toward the horizon, and the night was swiftly approaching. That meant that he would have to move soon. Over the next few days, Sonny traveled southeast, staying in the darkness of the sky below during the night and finding shelter on the undersides of the floating islands during the day. He was still weak because of his injuries and had to make frequent stops to rest and sleep, which slowed him down considerably. In the course of these days, Sonny made several stunning discoveries. The first one was rather pleasant and beneficial to him. As it turned out, there were far fewer nightmare creatures populating the Kingdom of Hope in this era than there would be in the future he came from. That included the harrowing abominations that dwelled on the dark side of the islands. Their absence made the task of remaining below the isles far easier for him. Of course, there were still some monstrosities hiding in the darkness, but not nearly enough to keep him from simply avoiding them. In retrospect, that made sense. These lands were not completely devastated yet, and there were plenty of humans living on the levitating islands. It was because of them and their efforts that the population of nightmare creatures was low. It was also the reason why it took Solvane and her zealots a full decade or more to gather enough abominations to hold the accursed trials. The second discovery he made was, unfortunately, far less fortuitous, and also had to do with the human inhabitants of the Kingdom of Hope. He was still in the territory of the worshippers of war, which made it all but impossible to appear on the surface of the islands during the day unnoticed. But the dark side wasn't completely safe either. Multiple times, he saw humans traveling either across the heavenly chains or through the sky below. Hidden in the shadows, he observed several flying ships sail through the boundless darkness, some adorned with sails of pristine white, some of vivid red. He even witnessed two vessels locked in furious battle, arrows and pieces of burning wood falling into the abyss like rain. In the end, the ship with white sails rammed into the red one, splitting the vessel in half and sending the captain and crew to their deaths in the sky below. These ships looked similar, yet still different to the one the firekeepers had repaired and guided to the Ebony Tower. They were much smaller and slower, and didn't have a magnificent tree growing around their masts. The vessel Sonny had spent several weeks on looked much more ancient in comparison, like the original in front of lesser copies. The third discovery Sonny made was perhaps the most shocking. The crushing did not exist in this era. The islands rose and fell as usual, but no matter how high they climbed, no deadly force assaulted them, threatening to destroy anything too weak or too slow to run away. Many of the nightmare creatures Sonny had studied in the future were somewhat different here from what he knew, He had guessed that fact in the arena and confirmed it while observing the islands through the eyes of his shadow after escaping it. Now, he learned why. The crushing did not exist yet, and for that reason, the nightmare creatures had not gone through thousands of years of adaptation to learn how to survive its burden. Neither their bodies nor their behavior changed to accommodate the deadly force that would terrorize the entire region in the future yet. And that was why he had found them to be both familiar and strange. Armed with that knowledge, Sonny slowly made his way south, leaving the Red Colosseum and Saint Solvane further and further behind. His wounds slowly healed, and soon he felt that he would not be entirely useless in a fight anymore. That was just in time, because his days of peace were about to come to an end. It took Sonny almost 2 weeks to approach the southern boundary of the Chained Isles. The further from the Red Colosseum he went, the less presence the warmongers had in the surrounding areas. With Solvane's militant order occupying the western reaches of the Kingdom of Hope, and the followers of Sun God in control of its center, both engaged in a centuries-old conflict with each other, the South remained desolate and neglected. That made Sonny's life a bit easier, but also caused him to lower his guard a little, and he knew that could only be a recipe for disaster. He knew he still had to remain vigilant. After all, there were more and more unsightly horrors hiding in the deep shadows of the dark side as he traveled away from the human settlements. Things were never easy now, were they? After one of these long days of traveling through the dark, Sonny found himself clinging to the underside of a small floating island as he waited for the arrival of night. He had already rested and dined on several tubes of synth paste, so for now, there was nothing much for him to do but wait. As had been his habit for the past week or so, he summoned one of the memories from the Colosseum and studied its weave, trying to peer into the secrets of the complicated pattern of ethereal strings. Though he was armed with his innate intuition and the ability to compare different memories to each other, he was still making torturously slow progress in his understanding of sorcery. Or, at the very least, understanding this type of it. Weaver's sorcery seemed elegant, strange, and marvelous, but also inhumanly complex and elaborate. Sonny doubted that he would be able to comprehend its foundational principles anytime soon, and even if he did, his human mind was simply unable to encompass the whole of the infinitely convoluted patterns, let alone create one from scratch. Maybe if he had a powerful supercomputer instead of a brain. In any case, he was not going to be creating his own memories just yet. Hell, he might not ever. That didn't mean that he couldn't do anything, though. Sonny might not have had the capacity to create new weaves, but he had already proven his ability to copy those that already existed. He had reproduced the simplest and most common of them, the pattern responsible for storing memories in his soul and then summoning them back through essence in the dungeon of the Red Colosseum. With enough time and preparation, he would be able to copy other enchantments of the familiar weaves too. Creating anything meaningful was going to take a while, though. But that was not what Sonny was currently trying to achieve. Instead, he wanted to expand his sorceress repertoire from one trick to, well, any number of tricks that was bigger than one. As such, he was experimenting with his memories in hopes of learning how to modify and change an existing enchantment. Right now, Sonny was holding a slim dagger in one hand and a small silver bell in the other. The silver bell was the first memory he had ever received, and also the simplest, while the slim dagger was one of the weapons he had won in the arena. Its enchantment was rather straightforward. It made the weapon utterly noiseless. It didn't ring when struck against armor or another blade, and didn't even rustle as it entered the enemy's flesh. Sonny had chosen these two memories for the experiment because at their core, their enchantments were very similar. One was that of sound amplification, while the other was that of sound nullification. He wanted to change the latter into the former. In other words, he wanted to turn the silent dagger into a very noisy dagger. Not because that would be very useful. After all, one rarely needed to audibly announce one's presence after already stabbing someone, but rather to prove that he was capable of modifying enchantments. After studying the spell weave of the Silver Bell for many days, Sonny was close to memorizing the staggering complexity of the pattern of strings entirely. Since the bell had only one enchantment, it was easy to isolate it from the parts of the pattern that were common to all memories. So, in theory, he knew what shape to create. The dagger, on the other hand, was a bit different. It also only had a single enchantment and a single ember anchoring the pattern, but that ember was brighter, and the pattern itself was much larger and more intricate. However, there were certain similarities with the one in the bell, so Sonny could imagine turning one into another. He hesitated for a while, then sighed and raised Weaver's needle. Just like on the day he had found it, the long and narrow needle was enveloped in a faint, weak golden shine that only he could see. Thousands of years ago, or maybe sometime in the future, it had absorbed some of Weaver's deific blood along with tiny traces of divinity. Sonny suspected that the needle had not been a magical tool, and neither had it actually belonged to Weaver. Rather, it had been just a random needle that the Demon of Fate had found in the Ebony Tower and made use of to sew a new arm to their body, and its magical properties came from being washed in the daemon's blood. However, at this moment, the needle did possess magical properties. Just like Sonny's fingers, it was capable of interacting with the ephemeral strings that constituted spell weaves. Sonny threaded a shadow string through the needle and carefully thrust it into the sorceress pattern that created the enchantment of the silent dagger. He was hoping to replace some of the existing strings with his own, shift others around, and remove some completely. At first, everything went well. Sonny was on the verge of getting excited. But then, the same thing that happened with all his previous experiments repeated itself. At some point, the strings trembled, and then the whole pattern tore and collapsed, turning into a chaotic mess of rippled and fluttering threads. Sonny hurriedly retracted his hand, afraid to lose it, and watched as the slim dagger shimmered and disintegrated into a rain of dim sparks. A few moments later, the spell spoke solemnly.
Your memory has been destroyed.
Sonny grimaced and closed his eyes.
Damnation! Another one!
Then, however, he suddenly shifted and turned his head up, staring at the stone surface above him, as if trying to pierce its solid mass with his gaze. Up above, on the surface of the small island, one of his shadows had noticed movement. His training and experimentation would have to wait. Someone, or something, was approaching. Was it a human? A warmonger? Or was it a nightmare creature? Whatever it ended up being, Sonny was about to find out, and the only thing he could feel with much certainty was that it wasn't going to be friendly. The grass covering the surface of the island moved, and strange shapes appeared from beneath it. Some were similar to each other, while some were not. Whatever the case, they all shared the same deep emerald color. The shapes levitated upward, slowly coalescing together. The creepy shadow observed the eerie event from the shade of a large boulder, darkly excited. Sonny only understood what it was so excited about when the boulder suddenly split open and fell apart, making way for another of the shapes, this one easily recognizable. It was a massive emerald jawbone, similar to a human one in all aspects except for size. Sonny sighed, looking at the excited shadow. The creepy guy had always been strangely fascinated by dead things. No wonder he got fixated on a bunch of flying bones. As Sonny watched, the emerald bones assembled into a towering human skeleton, very similar to the powerful abomination of the same kind Sonny had fought and destroyed in the Red Colosseum, but much larger and way more frightening. The emerald skeleton stared north for a while, and then slowly headed towards the edge of the island, each of its steps making the ground shake. At the same time, a loud rattle of the heavenly chain rolled through the two skies. Sonny was so used to hearing them that he didn't pay it any attention at first, but then a deep frown appeared on his face. Something wasn't right. The rattling of the chain sounded different somehow. He lingered for a few moments, then silently dove into the shadows and glided to the northern slope of the flying isle. As soon as Sonny saw the heavenly chain stretching far into the distance, his heart grew cold. A terrifying abomination with a body that resembled a dirty mass of pitch-black tar was crawling underneath it, its back facing the sky below. Each second, a dozen tendrils of liquid darkness shot forward from the mass, sticking to the links of the giant chain and pulling the creature forward. The monstrosity was at least 20 meters long and so heavy that the iron of the heavenly tether groaned under its weight.
What hellish nightmare is this?
Sonny peered beneath the surface of the black tar creature and shuddered once he saw the taint of corruption that hid within its soul. The two hideous nodes of swirling darkness that spread cancerous veins through the body of the abomination were especially ripe and horrid, revealing its rank.
Corrupted. A corrupted monster.
Earlier, when he had been passing the islands north of his current shelter, he had felt the shadow of a powerful fiend hiding beneath one of them. Who knew that the horror nesting on the dark side of the flying island would turn out to be equal to the harrowing worm vine, and then decide to follow Sonny south on top of that? As Sonny froze for a moment, a large boulder suddenly flew from the island and hit the massive body of the black tar fiend, sending ripples across its liquid flesh. The force of the impact was so great that a destructive shockwave spread in all directions, causing the heavenly chain to rattle even louder. On the surface of the island, the towering emerald skeleton lowered its arms and stared at the invading horror, dark lights igniting in the pits of its empty eye sockets. The boulder it had just thrown disappeared within the body of the corrupted abomination, seemingly dealing it no damage. The creature simply continued crawling, its massive body surging forward like a black tide. Sonny gulped.
I probably need to run.
But before he could do anything, the advancing monster suddenly convulsed, and in the next second, dozens of sharp stone shards shot out of its flesh, each covered by fetid black liquid. Some rained on the emerald skeleton, and some hit the slopes of the island, causing large chunks of weathered stone to be turned into dust. Sonny barely managed to dodge one of them and stared with resentment at the small crater that appeared in place of his hiding place. Sure, he was an incorporeal shadow right now, but he would not make the mistake of assuming that a corrupted abomination had no way of wounding him. Who knew what this horror was capable of? And just as this thought entered his mind, he noticed that there was a thin layer of black tar spread around the point of impact, and dozens of similar ones nearby. As he watched, the foul liquid started to move, coalescing into small dark blobs. Some of them began crawling up toward the emerald skeleton, but some froze for a moment and then flowed toward him, as though sensing his location. Crap! Sonny hurriedly summoned back the creepy shadow and lunged away, gliding through the shadows as fast as he could. By the time he reached the bottom of the island, the black tar monster was already upon the skeleton. Numerous tendrils of darkness shot forward, enveloping the towering abomination. Despite all its might, the emerald skeleton was instantly trapped and pulled inside the mass of liquid darkness. It struggled desperately, but to no avail. Seconds later, its massive figure disappeared within the body of the dark side fiend without a trace.
Now, just forget about me, Hellspawn. I'm too small and inconsequential anyway.
Sonny was already on the southern slope of the island, rushing toward the other heavenly chain that led away from this damned place. Somewhere above him, the giant mass of liquid darkness rippled, perhaps grinding the ancient emerald bones into dust. And then, the corrupted fiend suddenly surged forward with incredible speed, heading for the very same chain. Or rather, for the swift shadow that hoped to use the chain to escape. Luckily, Sonny reached it first. He burst from the shadows, flying across the span of empty air, and landed on the surface of the heavenly tether in a roll. Without wasting a single moment, Sonny pushed himself off the cold iron surface with all four arms, wrapped the shadows around his body, and ran. As dull pain spread through his chest, the mantle of the underworld turned as light as a feather. Just a few seconds later, the chain swayed wildly beneath his feet, announcing that the black tar monster had reached it too.
Curses.
There were a few hundred meters of giant sunlit links in front of him, and only past that was the heavenly tether submerged into the darkness of the sky below and shrouded in shadows.
I'll make it. Surely I will.
Sonny growled, bared his fangs, and ran. He hadn't come this far just to die now. Still, as he rushed forward, he could sense the oozing monstrosity quickly coming up behind him. The upper arms of Sonny's demon body were much longer than that of a human. Bending down, he fell on all fours and broke into a bestial gallop, flying forward with incredible speed. With each jump, the saving darkness grew closer and closer. The links of the heavenly chain rattled and swayed wildly beneath his feet as the black tar fiend pursued behind him. Sonny could have tried to find safety in the depths of the sky below, but his speed and maneuverability in the air would have been severely diminished. If the abomination decided to expel another rain of tar-covered projectiles, he would surely be shredded, torn to pieces, and consumed. Besides, he had no way of knowing the harrowing creature couldn't just follow him into the abyss. His best chance was to reach the segment of the chain submerged in darkness, glide across it as a swift shadow, and escape to the next island. Behind him, the mass of liquid darkness rolled forward with staggering speed, hundreds of black tendrils shooting out of it every moment to form a ceaseless tide. The distance between them grew smaller and smaller still.
Oh gods.
Just a split second before the tendrils of darkness descended upon him, Sonny finally reached a sufficiently low altitude and dove into the shadows, turning into one of them and rushing forward across the giant chain. The space where he had stood just a moment ago was now completely enveloped by the foul flesh of the tar monstrosity. The beast then lunged after him, somehow starting to move even faster. A strange, deafening sound that resembled a gurgling wail escaped from the depths of the massive liquid darkness, causing Sonny's whole being to writhe in pain. It washed over the world like a wave, penetrating deep into the darkness of the sky below and the radiance of the sky above, and making both shudder. Sonny fled across the border between two skies, and the harrowing creature from the dark side followed. Soon, the length of the heavenly chain that was shrouded in shadows came to its end, and he leapt forward at a terrible speed, sliding across the metal of the links and barely keeping himself from plummeting down. A tide of black, shifting tendrils fell at him almost instantly, but hit only ancient iron. Sonny had stepped through the shadows, appearing a couple of dozen meters away, and then, once again, teleporting to the surface of the island that loomed above him now. That last jump ate a lot of his essence, but he had no other choice than to make it. Falling to the ground, Sonny grabbed at his chest, which was pulsating with dull, crippling pain, and groaned. Then, he threw himself up and continued running. Behind him, the tendrils of black tar were already above the edge of the island. Sonny found himself among remnants of an ancient battlefield. Carcasses of broken ships lay forlornly on the barren earth, their blackened hulls covered with scorch marks and gaping holes filled with empty darkness. Here and there, pieces of rusty weapons and armor protruded from the ground, covered with ash. The ground itself was shattered and uneven, littered with pockmarks of deep craters. Knowing that he would never escape the giant fiend on foot, Sonny alternated between galloping and jumping through shadows for short distances, sometimes chaining several jumps in a row. By exerting every fiber of his demonic body to its limit, he managed to stay ahead of the pursuing abomination for now, even if it was just barely. Behind him, the monstrous creature barreled through wreckage of the fallen ships, breaking them apart with a thunderous cacophony of crashes. Its tendrils ripped the wooden hulls apart like paper, sending clouds of ash and debris flying through the air. On the opposite side of the island, Sonny saw the remnants of a colossal pyre. Thousands upon thousands of charred human bodies were arranged into a solemn pyramid to form it. These were, perhaps, the remains of the warriors that had fought in this battle and once crewed the broken ships. What had brought them to this island, and what had they fought for? Who had won the terrible battle, and at what cost? Had this pyre been meant to honor fallen heroes, or dispose of dead enemies? Or even prisoners, perhaps? Without sparing a single thought to these questions, he dove down from the edge and fell through the air, reaching another chain and escaping further south. A few moments later, the corrupted fiend flowed over the edge as well, landing at the heavenly tether with a deafening thud. Sonny was still ahead. The fiend failed to outrun him. For now. The problem was that Sonny was growing tired and slowly running out of shadow essence, while the black tar monster was not. South, 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 pursued by the fiend from the dark side, Sonny fled south, crossing one island after another. But no matter how fast he ran, the damned monstrosity was faster. Many of the islands he traversed were populated by nightmare creatures of all kinds, but unlike the towering emerald skeleton, these ones didn't even try to fight the corrupted abomination. Instead, they fled as he did, scattering to the neighboring islands in something that resembled a panic. The ones that didn't flee fast enough were quickly consumed by the oozing horror. At some point, Sonny found himself running side by side with all kinds of nightmare creatures that usually wouldn't have hesitated to attack him. They were like forest animals escaping from a raging fire, when a forest fire spread like an insatiable monster, devouring all in its way. Predators and prey were made equal before its terrifying strength. Besides, with his monstrous body and his mind still clouded by the countless times he had shadowed abominations of all kinds in the Red Colosseum, Sonny was now a little more like the nightmare creatures than he had used to be. The black tar monster, however, was making a clear distinction between him and all the other creatures. It only paid attention to those abominations that were directly in its way, while its only goal, for some damned reason, was singular: to catch and consume Sonny.
Curse it all! What's so special about me?
Was it the fact that he followed the path of ascension instead of corruption? Was it his nature as a shadow? Or maybe, was it the flame of divinity that burned in his soul and flowed through his veins? Was that flame an irresistible lure for a creature like that? There was no answer. All Sonny could do was run, 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 run as his chest became consumed with pain and his soul became empty and barren, devoid of any essence at all. Sometime later, he escaped from the shadows one last time and fell on the emerald grass of a new island, almost completely spent of essence and sapped of all stamina. His single heart was beating wildly in his aching chest, drowning as it tried to do the work meant for two. His 4 lungs were on fire. He was done, and that meant that he was also done for. This was it. This was as far as he could go. Sonny drew in a hoarse breath, and then slowly rose to his feet. His eyes shone with grim darkness.
So be it. Good. Come and get me, beast. Let us see which one of us is stronger. I have killed creatures mightier than you before.
Granted, during the battle with Wormvine, he had months of preparations and a whole cohort of firekeepers supporting him. Sonny used the last of his essence to summon the cruel sight and turned around, ready to face the assault of the black tendrils. However, something was off.
Huh?
The rattling of the heavenly chains. It had grown quiet. He frowned, then took a few steps toward the edge of the island and looked down. The black tar monster was some distance away, its massive body hanging motionlessly from the heavenly tether. It was frozen and unmoving, with only its tendrils pulsating in a bizarre and nauseating rhythm. The abomination seemed to be reluctant to approach this particular island. It was as though there was an invisible boundary that it refused to cross for some reason. Sonny stared at the harrowing creature for a few moments, and then snarled. He had escaped an inescapable situation once again. He had successfully fled the pursuit of the terrifying fiend. It seemed that luck was on his side in the end. However, was it really? Sonny shivered.
But what exactly was powerful enough to scare a corrupted monster away?
Sonny stared at the terrifying tar fiend off in the distance, wondering what had ended its pursuit. Then, suddenly, he grimaced, clutched his chest, and fell to one knee. A bestial growl escaped through his sharp fangs. His heart was beating wildly, sending waves of pain rolling through his exhausted body. He felt weak and lightheaded, beads of sweat glistening on his obsidian skin. This condition was only worsened by the usual sense of frailty that came from utterly depleting reserves of essence. Sonny felt like his entire body was falling apart.
God damn it. Am I having a heart attack?
He groaned, remained motionless for a bit, and then slowly stood up. Still clutching his chest, he hunched awkwardly and looked around, trying to determine which island he had found himself on, and what wicked creature might have kept the corrupted monstrosity at bay. His pupils widened slightly.
No way.
The night was slowly advancing, and the island was drowned by the dimming resplendence of a beautiful crimson sunset. Despite only having been here once, Sonny recognized the place. The vastness of the island, the emerald grass that veiled its surface like a soft carpet, the rolling hills, the moss-covered ruins. He had reached the southern island, where the crumbling fortress lay at the estuary of the Great Chain, one of the anchors which connected the isles to the mainland of the Dream Realm far below. Well, the fortress had been ruined in the future. Currently, it might still be standing.
Such luck.
Sonny was glad to learn that he had arrived at the southernmost point of the Chained Isles during his mad escape from the Black Tar Fiend. However, he was still uneasy about the fact that the abomination refused to approach it. He was in no condition to fight anything, let alone a creature capable of scarring a corrupted monster. But what choice was there? Sonny glanced at the massive body of the terrifying abomination that loomed in the distance, and then back toward the center of the island. The choices, really, were simple. He could either jump back on the heavenly chain and try his luck in a battle against the Black Tar Fiend, or remain on the island and risk meeting the unknown horror. He hesitated for a bit, and then started limping away from the edge. Yes, an unknown danger was almost always worse than that which was familiar. But who knew? Maybe he was going to get lucky. Maybe the unseen horror was going to turn out friendly and nice.
Yeah, why not? Sure. Statistically speaking, a thing like that is bound to happen. One day.
By the time Sonny reached the center of the island, the night had already descended upon the world, and a full moon was climbing up the velvet surface of the starlit sky. The hills became shrouded in darkness, which hid and protected him, and there was a little bit of shadow essence now, filling his 3 cores. The pain in his chest had subsided somewhat, but Sonny still felt weak and feverish. He was heading toward the southern edge of the island to take a look at the current status of the boundary fortress and study its surroundings carefully in search of any sign of danger. If there was indeed a terrible threat somewhere on the island, it would be better to discover it before it had the chance to discover him first. Cresting the top of a tall hill, Sonny suddenly froze and then crouched down. Safely veiled by the shadows, he looked at a shimmering white light that danced some distance away in the center of a small valley that was formed by the hill he was standing on and several others.
What is this?
He hesitated for a moment, then commanded the gloomy shadow to slide off from his body and get closer to the source of light. However, the shadow hesitated too. Sonny blinked.
What the hell are you waiting for? Get down there. You can run away if things go wrong.
The gloomy shadow gave him a long look, then shook its head resentfully. Finally, It nervously glided forward. Soon, Sonny saw a strange picture. In the center of the valley, a small fire burned, its color entirely white. In front of it, a lone human figure sat. The human's head was hung low, his face obscured by the falling hair. He was naked above the waist, his pale skin covered with dry blood. However, there seemed to be no wounds on the stranger's body. In fact, there was not a single scar upon it. On a stone in front of him, a diamond sickle lay, its blade painted crimson. The image of the bloodied man, half of his body illuminated by the warm light of the dancing fire, half washed in the cold pale moonlight, was eerie and strangely beautiful. Sonny found himself slightly hypnotized by the solemn mystery of it all, almost to the point of forgetting the danger he was in. After a while, the man let out a deep sigh, and then suddenly spoke in a bright, melodious voice. "Who is it there, hiding in the shadows? Don't be so timid, friend. Come out, share the warmth of this fire with me, if you wish. The night is cold and dark." A sonorous laughter rolled across the valley. "Oh, don't be scared. I won't eat you." Sonny shivered.
Keep your voice down, fool. There's something horrible hiding on this island.
But then, he thought for a moment and shuddered. Unless the man himself was the unknown horror. The man in question, meanwhile, raised his head, finally revealing his face. It was young and beautiful, with smooth silken skin, high cheekbones, and exquisite features. The man's smile was carefree and pleasant, his eyes bright and humorous. There was a symbol of a crescent moon drawn on his forehead. Sonny recognized him immediately, of course. It was the exact same face he had seen 1,000 times, depicted on each of the miraculous coins. However, Sonny had no time to pay this revelation any attention, because something else drew all of it. It was the fact that the young man shifted slightly, turned his head, and looked directly at him. He wasn't even looking at the gloomy shadow that hid some distance away from the fire. No, this man was definitely looking at the distant top of the hill, where Sonny himself was crouched in the darkness. There was no use hiding. Whoever this man was, he knew exactly where Sonny was.
Crap.
The young man beckoned him with a finger, still smiling. "Come, come. It is rude to refuse a sincere invitation, especially one coming from such a nice person as me." "Oh, where are my manners? I didn't even introduce myself. Rejoice, stranger. You are in the brilliant presence of Noctis, the great sorcerer of the East." Sonny froze, unsure of what the wisest course of action would be. What to do? After meeting Solvayne, he had a heavy prejudice against crossing paths with powerful figures in the Kingdom of Hope, and Noctis was very powerful. Of that, he had no doubt. In fact, Sonny was pretty sure that the friendly young man who was looking at him with a charming smile was none other than one of the 7 immortal shackles of the imprisoned daemon, the mysterious Lord of the East. Even without taking into account the otherworldly presence that all transcendents seemed to possess, it was easy to tell that there was a vast and dreadful power within Noctis, hiding behind the deceptively carefree gleam of his lustrous eyes. Plus, There was a citadel in the eastern reaches of the Chained Isles, literally called the Sanctuary of Noctis. Who else could have been the ruler there? Who else could have possessed the beautiful flying ship and had their image put on the miraculous coins? So, Sunny had no desire to meet the strange immortal, even though Noctis seemed weirdly friendly and unthreatening. In fact, that only made him more terrifying. But was there even a choice? It was not like Sunny was in any shape to escape from a saint, let alone an immortal sorcerer that even corrupted abominations seemed to be wary of. And it was clear that hiding wasn't an option. He'd already tried that to rather pathetic results. No, Sunny didn't have a choice. He would have to meet this strange warlock face to face and see what the man wanted. He could only hope that Noctis's desires didn't involve his own horribly painful death. He hesitated for a bit, then sighed, rose, and headed toward the crackling fire. Noticing his approach, Noctis hummed in satisfaction, and then slightly moved his hand. Immediately, droplets of dew flew from the grass, forming a clear stream that swirled around his body, washing the dry blood away. An exquisite silk cloak rose from the ground, wrapping itself around him. The diamond sickle whistled through the air, shaking itself clean, and hung itself on the sorcerer's belt. Sunny continued walking, still clutching his aching chest, and observed the bizarre occurrence with a deadpan expression.
Damn, why don't I know how to perform tricks like that? That would make life so much easier.
Finally, under the gloating gaze of the vindictive and gloomy shadow, Sunny walked into the circle of light from the fire. He couldn't help but tremble when the saint threw a curious glance at him. It was hard to remain calm in front of a being that could easily obliterate you with the slightest flex of one finger. Sunny tried to act cool and calm in front of the warlock, but the task was as impossible as trying to solve difficult math equations while someone pointed a bazooka at your head. The whole situation was sort of ridiculous, actually. Noctis looked like a pampered young man in bright silks, with an effeminate face and the body of someone who had never once exerted themselves physically. His hands were smooth and uncalloused, and his build was slender and soft, almost frail. Sunny, on the other hand, was a towering demon, clad in an intricate and fearsome suit of onyx armor, his gaunt figure brimming with ferocious might. He had twisting horns, 4 powerful arms, and a mouth full of sharp fangs, his eyes completely black and inhuman. And yet, it was the demon who was afraid of the pampered young man, and not the other way around.
Ridiculous.
Noctis studied the tenumbrous demon in front of him, his smile growing wider. Ah, what a fortuitous encounter. A shadow. Did fate guide you to me, I wonder? Sunny grew very still.
Fate? What does he mean?
The sorcerer, meanwhile, gestured for him to sit. Sit down, Shadow. It seems that you are unwell. Rest for a bit and warm yourself. Sunny hesitated, then lowered himself to the ground, sitting across the dancing flames from the transcendent. He gleaned at Noctis's soul to make sure that he was right to call the young man so, and saw a single resplendent core shining in his chest. That was the soul core of a saint indeed. Noctis remained silent for a while, and then asked, Say, Shadow, what is your name? Sunny lingered, then stretched a hand forward and scratched 2 runes into one of the stones surrounding the fire. Sorcerer's brows flew up. Those runes, huh? Goodness gracious. Now I am sad that I wasn't as studious as my mentors demanded all that time ago. Those boring charlatans. Well, let's see.
Star? No. That would be sun. Lost sun? Absence of sun. Sunless? Sunny nodded, causing Noctis to beam with a prideful grin. Ha! There's indeed no one smarter than me in the Kingdom of Hope. The rumors are true. Well, of course they are true. I'm the one who paid storytellers to spread them. In any case, Sunless, what a fitting name you have. Truly, a name worthy of a shadow. A little on the nose, if you ask me, but very nice, nevertheless. Well done. Sunny tilted his head, staring at the saint in confusion.
What the hell? Is this guy simply eccentric, or is he completely insane?
Noctis didn't mind being stared at, and instead seemed to enjoy it a great deal. He looked at the Onyx demon in return, the smile frozen on his face. The humor in his eyes slowly disappeared, making way for a strange, dangerous gleam. Sunless, since fate itself has brought us together, can you answer me a simple question? Feeling tension spreading through his exhausted body, Sunny grew grim and then slowly nodded.
This is not good. Not good at all. Damn it. Why is everyone in this place crazy?
Noctis leaned forward and said, his voice deceptively calm and friendly, Tell me, do you, perhaps, have a knife cut from a single piece of black obsidian in your possession? Sunny shivered.
How in the hell does he know?
But there was nothing he could do. The question had been asked, and now he was compelled to answer. He struggled against his flaw for as long as he could, then gritted his teeth and nodded again. The immortal sorcerer stared at Sunny for a few moments, his lustrous eyes reflecting moonlight like two shining pools of pale blue radiance. Then, he suddenly threw his head back and exploded with joyful laughter, as though he had just heard the funniest joke in history. Noctis laughed so hard that tears appeared in his eyes, glistening in the moonlight like crystals. Finally, he satiated his mirth and glanced at Sunny once again, the carefree smile returning to his face. Ah, Sunless, fate is the funniest thing in the world, don't you think? You and I have a feeling that we are going to be great friends, Sunless. Believe it? Sunny froze, his tired body tensing up. His vertical pupils narrowed, and breath escaped through his gritted fangs with a hissing sound.
Damnation.
Despite the strange reactions of the eccentric saint, he wasn't fooled. Out here in the Kingdom of Hope, there was no power greater than that of the immortal wardens that guarded its imprisoned queen, and the only weakness the immortals had were the knives that held their fates hostage. The obsidian knife was a weapon that could destroy one of the eternal shackles, and as such, it was a priceless treasure. The very concept of value was too mundane and pedestrian to be applied to it. And he had just revealed the fact that one was in his possession, to a guy who was infinitely more powerful than he was. A guy who was one of the very immortals whose lives the knife could reap. It didn't matter if the obsidian knife was meant for Noctis himself, or one of the other shackles. If it threatened his own fate, then the sorcerer would stop at nothing to gain control of it, so that no one else could. If it threatened another's, he would be able to exert influence over one of the wardens or dispose of them completely. Either way, Noctis would undoubtedly try to take the knife. But inexplicably, the sorcerer did nothing of the sort. Instead, as Sunny stared at him in confusion, Noctis relaxed and started to hum a joyful melody. Then, he suddenly clapped his hands in excitement. Ah, Sunless, how fortunate it is that I've met you. His smile dimmed a little, and his eyes, for a moment, grew dark and terrifying.
Before we met, you see, I was prepared to do something rather drastic. But now, there is no need. The divination truly worked.
He remained silent for a few moments, and then seamlessly switched back to his usual carefree persona.
This wonderful occasion demands a celebration. Yes, we simply must celebrate while you're still alive, which won't be for long, regretfully, so better keep it simple.
Sonny flinched.
What?
Meanwhile, something rustled in the air, and a figure of a very tall man suddenly appeared out of the darkness. Sonny tensed, surprised that the stranger managed to approach them unnoticed. Why had he not sensed the bastard? The figure calmly stepped into the light, revealing itself to not be a man at all. Instead, it was a wooden mannequin, carved into the semblance of a man, wearing an elegant livery with embroidered sleeves and hem. It had simple features and held a tray with grapes, fresh fruit, and several beautifully painted amphoras of wine. The mannequin looked disturbingly familiar. In fact, it bore a close resemblance to a far less feral, ancient, and corrupted version of the sailor dolls, the nightmare creatures that populated Shipwreck Island before Sonny and the Firekeepers eradicated them. The strange sailor doll placed the tray in front of them, stepped back into the darkness, and froze, becoming indistinguishable from a dead piece of wood. Noctis smiled and reached out for one of the amphoras. Sonny's thoughts, meanwhile, were a little distracted.
What the hell does he mean I won't be alive for long?
He opened his mouth and then closed it in frustration and hurriedly traced several runes in the ash.
What? Why?
The sorcerer scowled as he tried to read them, then gave him an apologetic smile.
Why are we keeping it so simple? Yes, of course you would be confused. See, usually I would have thrown a great feast to celebrate the occasion. I am the most gracious person in the Kingdom of Hope, after all. But sadly, we will have to be satisfied with this shameful...
Sonny furiously shook his head and then drew several more runes.
Sunless. Death. Why?
Noctis stared at him with surprise.
Well, aren't you dying? That broken heart of yours is giving out. I thought that this was why you came here, to spend your last few days near his resting place.
Sonny blinked a few times, trying to digest what he had just heard. Was his one remaining heart really failing? It did feel like it was on the verge of tearing apart during his escape from the black tar monster. It continued to ache still. And whose resting place was Noctis talking about? No, that was not important right now. He erased the previous runes and traced two more.
Heart. Broken?
Noctis frowned.
Wait. Do you perhaps not want to die? I didn't say anything before in order to respect your wishes. But if dying peacefully was not your intention, then why are you wasting time drinking wine with me? Sunless, are you crazy?
Sonny stared at him for a few moments, unamused, his eyes full of resentment. Then he ground his fangs and wrote,
No. Don't know. Maybe. Heart. Heal?
The sorcerer scratched his head.
You are a very strange shadow, Sunless. Well, mending a broken heart is not easy, and yours are not just broken. In fact, you appear to have misplaced one. Until you replace that lost heart, there is no point in healing the one that remains. It will just break apart again. But where would a shadow creature like you find a suitable heart in this god-forsaken land?
He sighed.
The servants of shadow are all gone, and so are the servants of heart. Without them, only the greatest of healers would be able to build a heart worthy of a shadow demon from scratch.
Noctis looked down dejectedly, but then a mischievous smile appeared on his face.
Luckily, I am the most gifted and renowned healer in the entire Kingdom of Hope. For me, creating a new heart for you won't be a problem at all. But Sunless, despite the fact that you and I are dear friends, a favor like that is not something to be given lightly. I wouldn't want to put a strain on our friendship, you know. So, you'll have to do something for me as well. That would only be polite, don't you think?
Sonny had a feeling that he was being swindled. After all, he was an accomplished swindler himself. However, that didn't really matter. Noctis's claims about the inevitable failure of his one remaining heart did, unfortunately, ring true. Perhaps if Sonny managed to not put any excessive strain on it in the future, things would be fine. But what were the chances of him having a peaceful life in a nightmare? 0. There were 0 chances. He desperately needed a functioning heart, and better yet, 2 of them. Only then would he be back to his full strength and ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. Sonny sighed and drew several runes, already suspecting what he would hear.
He wants the damn knife, doesn't he? That bastard. Sunless. Do. What?
Noctis looked at him for a few moments, then smiled. What he said next, however, was not what Sonny expected to hear. The sorcerer suddenly turned around and gestured south.
Oh, it's nothing much, really. You see, there's an abandoned fortress on the edge of this island. All I want is for you to climb inside and remain there until dawn. Actually, it will be best if you can fall asleep. So, a little nap in exchange for a new heart. Doesn't sound too bad, does it? I mean, it's just a few hours of sleep. Really? What's the worst that could happen?
Nearby, the gloomy shadow grabbed its head in utter despair. Sonny remained silent for a long time, looking at Noctis with a grim expression. Finally, he shifted and drew several runes, the onyx claw of his armored gauntlet moving through the ash with swift precision.
Fortress. Danger. Inside.
The sorcerer laughed.
Danger? Of course there is danger. But don't worry. It's nothing that you won't be able to handle. I think. Believe, even. Regardless, there's no one in the entire Kingdom of Hope better suited for this task than you, Sunless. So, hurry up. Time's a-wasting.
Sonny scowled, unamused by the fact that Noctis avoided the question. Unwilling to let go, he growled and pointed to the runes again. The sorcerer sighed wistfully.
It's not that I don't want to tell you, Sunless. It's just that there's no point. You won't remember anyway. But this will benefit us both, trust me. This fortress once belonged to a friend of mine. He was one of Hope's shackled, just like me. And a shadow, just like you. Do you see now why I think that fate itself has brought us together?
Sonny held his breath.
So, I was right. Noctis is indeed one of the immortals.
And more than that, one of the original 7 that had been a follower of Shadow God. Only 5 wardens were still alive, and none of them held dominion over the south. So, it was safe to assume that this Shadow Lord was dead. Suddenly, the sorcerer's comment about this island being someone's resting place made more sense. If so, maybe there were some relics that the Transcendent of Shadows left behind in the fortress. That
changed things. A little. Sonny hesitated for a while and then gestured to his chest. Noctis smiled. What? Surely you are not doubting my skill? Rest assured, Sunless, I'll create a wonderful new heart for you. As a bonus, I'll even replace the fingers you seem to be missing. Unless not having fingers is your preference, of course. Sonny stared at him for a few minutes, then sighed and stood up. Picking up a bunch of grapes, he glanced at the eccentric sorcerer one more time, and then headed south, toward the edge of the island where the abandoned fortress stood. You won't remember it anyway. I wonder what the hell did he mean? As he walked, Sonny noticed several clusters of beautiful white flowers growing here and there among the emerald grass. The closer to the fortress he came, the more of these flowers there were. Even though it was the middle of the night, their buds were open, filling the air with a faint but pleasant smell. A deep scowl appeared on his face. These flowers. They looked vaguely familiar. He slowly ate the sweet, succulent grapes and searched his memory for a hint of where he might have seen them. After a while, his expression turned even darker. There was an island in the eastern reaches of the Chained Isles, not too far from the sanctuary of Noctis, covered by a vast and beautiful field of such white flowers. Everyone, even the most competent cohorts of Awakened and those from the Whitefeather clan, avoided this island like a plague. The ground there was littered with bones of all kinds, hidden beneath the delicate white petals. As soon as a person stepped on the surface of the island, they would feel an irresistible desire to stop, rest, and fall asleep. And if they succumbed to that desire, none ever woke up. Sonny silently cursed. Is that bastard trying to kill me? But for some reason, he had trouble believing that Noctis simply wanted him dead. A saint had far easier ways to kill an Awakened, let alone someone as tired and weakened as he was. There was no need to go to such lengths. So, what the sorcerer had said must have been true, or at least close to it. He believed that Sonny was uniquely suited for the task and had a good chance of accomplishing it alive. But why? What was so special about Sonny? What could he do that even a transcendent could not? Was it because he was connected to Shadow God, as the previous owner of this fortress had been? Full of dark thoughts, he crested another hill and saw the familiar silhouette of the Boundary stronghold not too far away. It was in much better condition than it had been in the future. It almost looked whole, if not for the moss covering its walls, the lack of lights, and the deathly silence that enveloped it. Sonny would have thought that the castle was still inhabited by humans. The tall walls built of gray stone rose high into the night sky, and the massive gates were closed shut. The ancient fortress was bathed in the pale moonlight, looking somber and foreboding, like a cursed tomb. Sonny grimaced. Not ominous at all. Still clutching his chest, he made his way down the hill and approached the menacing stronghold. Its walls had not crumbled yet, so the path he had taken to get inside the last time did not exist. Full of grim unease, Sonny thrust his claws into the ancient stone and started climbing. These walls were nothing compared to the Great Wall of the Dark City. Getting to the top was not going to be hard, even for a human. And currently, he wasn't even human. He was a demon, and a dying one at that. He finally reached the top of the wall and crouched on its lip, looking down into the empty courtyard. Here, the signs of abandonment were more pronounced. There was dust and dirt everywhere, with weeds growing through the ancient cobblestones. The fortress was desolate and hollow, devoid of anyone to inhabit and take care of it. He hesitated with a decision for a bit, and then reluctantly sent 2 of his shadows away to explore the stronghold. If there was indeed a powerful creature nesting inside, they would surely find it. Minutes passed in tense anticipation. The shadows glided through the empty corridors and halls of the abandoned stronghold, through its towers and dungeons. However, no matter where they looked, they did not find any sign of life. What they did find, however, were corpses. Here and there, human skeletons lay, still dressed in archaic garments and armor. There was no sign of struggle around them, no tears on their clothes, and no apparent wounds on their bodies. It just seemed as though the former garrison of the stronghold had lowered themselves to the ground and died for no reason whatsoever. All of it was just too eerie.
Curse it all. Curse the damned immortals. And curse this damned place.
Sonny almost turned around and ran, but then his chest pulsed with pain, reminding him of the reason why he had come here. With a deep sigh, he jumped down from the edge of the wall and walked toward the main structure of the fortress.
Time to find me a soft bed.
Sonny entered the dungeon, summoned the shadows back, and walked through the silent halls on his way to the higher levels of the massive tower. Once there, he walked around for a bit, searching for a suitable room, and soon found one that seemed to be both comfortable and well protected. Unceremoniously throwing a corpse in a rotten nightgown off the bed, he lay down in its place and tiredly closed his eyes. Sure, this place was beyond creepy, but he was, in fact, tired to the bone and in desperate need of rest. Some sleep would do him good.
What's the big deal anyway? I've slept in far worse places.
Before falling into the embrace of oblivion, he summoned the saint from the shadows and gave her a mental command to watch over him. After hesitating for a bit, Sonny did the same with the soul serpent. Only once the 2 shadows assumed guard did he allow himself to relax. In the silence of the abandoned fortress, Sonny could easily hear the strained beating of his heart. However, he was too exhausted to pay it any attention. Just a few minutes later, he was already sound asleep. And just a moment before falling into a deep slumber, with his mind already half gone, he thought that he heard an unexpected sound, somewhere close, but also far away. It was like the ringing of hooves on the cold stone floors. Sonny woke up just before dawn. He lay still for a while, reluctant to leave the warm embrace of the blankets. Then, with a sigh, he sat up and shivered in the morning cold. It was time to face a new day, and there was a lot to do. He had no excuses to laze about. A dull pain suddenly radiated from inside his chest. He looked down with a confused expression, studying the old scars covering his tan, bronze skin.
I guess it's going to rain.
Then, an ivory arm suddenly appeared from beneath the blankets, caressing his firm muscles.
Is it morning already?
Sonny smiled, grasped the hand of his wife, and nodded.
Yes, my sunshine.
She sighed.
All right, go get ready. I'll wake up the little devil.
He remained motionless, leisurely enjoying the sight of the beauty he had somehow managed to coax into marrying a ruffian like him. She dressed herself, careful not to disturb the round belly where her second child slept peacefully. His smile grew a little wider.
I said go. Today is not the day for your mischief, hoodlum. Have you forgotten?
Sonny made a dejected face, then rose and dressed as well. When he left their quarters, the servants were already hard at work, preparing for the day. When they saw him, each bowed respectfully and greeted him with warm voices. Being subjected to all this adoration and decorum, Sonny had to put on a face worthy of a lord as well. The servants were going to prepare everything for the upcoming journey, but one thing he had to do himself. That was something that Sonny would not allow anyone else to perform, not for the lack of trust, but simply because it was his duty. Entering the stables, he greeted his steed and went about feeding and watering the noble beast before putting the saddle on his wide back. Sonny might have become a lord of some renown and left his turbulent past behind, but the bond between a warrior and his horse was sacred. Just because the two of them didn't have to risk their lives on a battlefield anymore didn't mean that he would forget it. When all was done, he led the horse to the courtyard and attached the weathered wooden scabbard to the saddle, the cold steel of a beautiful sword hidden safely within. Then he stared at the scabbard for some time, massaging his aching chest with a distant expression. A subtle dark expression appeared on his face. After a while, the sound of quick steps headed his way.
Dad!
Sonny turned around and grinned as he caught his son in a warm embrace.
Trying to sneak up on your poor old father, huh? Not so fast. I was sneaking up on monsters long before you were born, Pratt.
The boy giggled and then took a step back. He was turning 7 today, and for that occasion, his mother had dressed him in the best clothes they had. The little devil almost looked like a proper child, and not a corrupted abomination sent to the mortal realm to torture his helpless parents.
Why did you have to sneak up? Too weak to kill them outright, huh?
Sonny sighed in exasperation and stared at the heavens.
Lady, help me.
Why did their son have to inherit his poisonous tongue as well? The boy, meanwhile, turned around and looked into the distance where the beautiful silhouette of the ivory tower could already be seen in the morning haze. His eyes widened.
Dad, is it true? Am I going to see her today? The lady?
Sonny nodded.
Of course. You're turning 7, are you not? Today is a divine day, so you will meet our goddess and introduce yourself and pledge yourself to her service.
His son frowned.
But she isn't really a goddess, is she? Won't other gods be angry with me?
Sonny laughed.
Gods are too great and mighty to know what jealousy means, my child. Why would they mind? Lady Hope gives us shelter and safety, protects us from the corruption, from war, famine, plague, and even ourselves. If that is not something worthy of worship, then I don't know what is.
With that, he jumped into the saddle and then lifted the boy to sit in front of him.
Let's go.
They left the manor and followed the road of white stones through a peaceful forest and up a hill. The horse walked forward at a steady pace, easily bearing the weight of 2 riders. Sunshine fell through the canopy of leaves in wide beams, making their surroundings look like a fairy tale. Sonny was enjoying the beauty of the forest and its tranquility. A long time ago, before coming to the Kingdom of Hope, he had known neither. His life had been nothing but bloodshed and pain, battle after battle, war after war. Only after coming to this realm and deciding to remain here did he learn the truth of how joyous life could be, especially when shared with those you love. His son, however, didn't know anything about strife and darkness. This peace was all he had ever known. The boy fidgeted for a few minutes, then stared at the hilt of Sonny's sword.
One day, I'm going to have a sword of my own. It will be way bigger and sharper than yours, old man. Mark my words.
Sonny laughed.
What do you need a sword for?
His son glanced at him with confusion.
What do you mean, what for? To become an awakened, a warrior like you.
Sonny looked away and didn't respond for a while. His eyes grew distant. His heart ached. Why did it ache so much today?
I was a warrior once, true. But I never chose to be a warrior. I just became one to survive. In the Kingdom of Hope, you don't need to fight, suffer, and kill others to live a long and happy life. Why would you still want to become a warrior?
The boy fell silent, a comically thoughtful frown appearing on his face. He turned away and didn't say anything else for a while. Sonny doubted that his son really understood what he meant, and he hoped that the boy never would. Closing his eyes, he said a silent prayer.
Hail to you, Desire, Demon of Hope. Please, hear my yearning. Protect my son from all the horrors of the world, and save him, as you have saved me.
Silently, the man, the boy, and the horse left the forest and climbed the tall hill. From its top, a breathtaking sight opened before them. In front of them, a vast plain was bathed in sunlight, emerald grass shining with the morning dew. Here and there, farmsteads and fields stood, golden wheat swaying in the wind. Sparkling ribbons of rivers cut the plain, and in the distance, a beautiful city built of white stone rose from the ground, with a magnificent pagoda towering above it. Sonny couldn't help but smile. No matter how many times he saw it, he couldn't help but feel a little bit sentimental.
Do you want to wave to your mother? I'm sure she's looking in this direction right now.
His son glanced at him with a pitying expression.
Are you crazy? She won't see us. We're too far away.
Sonny laughed.
Says who?
He turned around and looked back at a similar landscape that lay behind them. Gazing past the forest, he saw the small town and a humble stone manor standing near it. From this distance, the building looked like a toy. He raised his hand and waved.
Hey, Dad.
Sonny scoffed.
What? Are you going to mock me some more?
The boy shook his head.
No, it's just... What is wrong with the sky? It looks funny.
Sonny raised his head, then frowned in confusion. The sky indeed looked funny. The sun was still climbing up, but there seemed to be a second one right above them, swelling with incandescent light. The sky itself was growing brighter and brighter, as if permeated with intense heat. The clouds were all gone. A gust of hot wind suddenly blew past them. His eyes suddenly narrowed.
Wait!
In the next second, a colossal pillar of incandescent flame suddenly fell from the sky, piercing the plain and shattering the land like glass. A blinding flash drowned the world in white, and through it, a terrible sound rolled across the forest. Deafened, Sonny felt his son screaming, but could not hear his voice. At the point where the pillar of flame fell, the ground itself was split open and thrown into the air. Colossal pieces of melted earth raining down fire, ash, and death. The hill on which they stood shook and then shifted, throwing Sonny off the horse.
No!
Still dazed, he tried to find his son, but failed. Instead, his gaze fell on the small town and the stone manor that stood in the distance. As Sonny watched in horror, the ground opened up, with fountains of fire shooting into the sky. The houses were instantly devoured by the flames and incinerated, turning into clouds of ash.
No!
In the next moment, the whole hill crumbled. The last thing Sonny saw before being smothered by the avalanche of scorching earth was the fragile figure of his son being swallowed by flames.
No!
And then he died. Pain. Why did his heart hurt so much? Sonny opened his eyes in the darkness and sat up, throwing the furs aside. He stared at his feeble chest, then touched it with a shaking hand, surprised. Since when did his chest start to ache during the night?
Being old is not fun.
Chasing the remnants of a terrible nightmare away, he struggled to sit up and massaged his joints for a while, waiting until some flexibility returned to them. Then he slowly stood up and closed his eyes, listening to the sounds of the sacred grove that enveloped him. Well, at least he woke up alive. At his age, that was already an accomplishment. If only his heart didn't ache so much. But that was just what being old meant. Every dawn brought a new ache. Actually, Sonny would have been more scared if he woke up and suddenly felt perfectly fine. In any case, it was time to face a new day. Using a wooden cane, Sonny walked out of his hut and breathed in the clear, sweet air of the sacred grove. The ancient trees rustled gently, as if greeting him. The forest was slowly waking up, emerald leaves longing to be bathed in the warmth of the sun once more. A chilly fog was flowing between the mighty trunks, suffused with the vibrant lilac light of the early dawn. The nightingales sang cheerfully, jumping from branch to branch. The sight of it was familiar, beautiful, and calming. Truly, the grove of the Heart God was the jewel of the Kingdom of Hope. How lucky he was to have been born and spend most of his life here. These trees had stood upon the ancient land before it had been shattered, weathered the terrible cataclysm of Desire's imprisonment, and were going to remain standing here long after he was dead and forgotten, his bones buried at their roots. Now that Sonny was old and didn't have a lot of time left to live, that thought was very comforting. A human's life might be fleeting, but the beautiful grove was eternal. He patted one of the ancient oaks as if it were an old friend. Then he sighed and limped toward the water spring to fill his jug. Since Sonny's hut stood at the outskirts of the grove, he could see the edge of the island through the spaces between the tree trunks. As always, it rose and fell slowly, the heavenly chains rattling from time to time. Everything was just as usual, which was the very best thing in the world. Sonny had lived a long life. Some of it was peaceful, and some of it was turbulent. But luckily, the turbulent times had not visited this quiet forest for a long, long while. And that was the only thing that he had always wanted, to live a quiet life, far away from all the strife and misfortune of the ever-changing world. Change always brought ruin on its wings. Sonny wanted no part of it. However, today, his desires were not meant to come true. Something unexpected did happen, disturbing the familiar routine of his day. At the very edge of the island, a mighty black steed suddenly appeared, as if jumping from below, where a great chain connected to the soil of the sacred grove. He walked forward at a steady pace, approaching the line of ancient trees. The steed had no saddle, but there was a rider on his back. A pretty young woman in a simple red tunic sat there, her ivory legs svelte and bare. She had a graceful figure, a face so lovely that it simply demanded to be gazed upon, and chestnut hair that fell down like a silken waterfall. Sonny stared at the young woman, mesmerized by her beauty. Then he scoffed and shook his head. He thought to himself,
What are you even doing, old fool? Your days of ogling pretty girls are long over. This beauty is young enough to be your granddaughter. Have some shame, you vile lech.
He chuckled wryly, and then changed his course to greet the unexpected guest. A dozen meters or so away from the line of trees, the young beauty stopped her horse, jumped down with breathtaking grace, and knelt in the soft grass, looking down as other pilgrims would usually do. Sonny made his way toward the girl, panting a little from the strain, and tried to put on a smile worthy of an enlightened elder. For some reason, the closer he got to the beauty, the worse his heart ached.
What's wrong with this frail old body of mine today? Greetings, young lady. Welcome. What brings you to the Heart Grove? Tell this old man your worries. Maybe I'll be able to help.
The beauty did not raise her head, still looking down as if to show her respect and reverence. Her voice, when she spoke, was melodious and calm. However, Sonny had been meeting pilgrims like her for many decades. All of them came here overwhelmed by sorrows and regret. That was why they sought out a passage to the sacred grove. This was a place of solace. He could sense a deep ocean of darkness, hiding behind the facade of calmness the young woman had put on too. She said, "I seek an audience with the Lady of the Grove." Sonny sighed.
So young, and yet so troubled. How sad.
Then he leaned on his cane and smiled.
Well, she ought to be up and about by now. How about that? I'll wait with you until the lady arrives.
The young beauty didn't answer. She simply continued to stare down, still as a statue. Her breathing was deep and steady. Even her scary black horse seemed patient and still. Almost too still to be real. Suddenly, Sonny felt a strange unease. He took a closer look at the girl and frowned.
Do I have dementia now? What in the name of hope is that?
His eyes seemed to be playing tricks on him. Sonny could swear that he saw a radiant sphere of light burning inside the young beauty's chest. Not that he was looking in that direction. Without any reason, his hand suddenly stretched sideways, his palm opening as if wanting to grasp something out of the air. Sonny stared at it in confusion.
Weird. What was that?
He awkwardly hid the willful hand behind his back and cleared his throat. Maybe he hadn't quite recovered from that terrible nightmare yet. As he did so, the young woman suddenly spoke, her head still bowed. "Tell me, have you ever seen the Ivory Tower?" Sonny grinned.
Oh, sure. When I was a senseless youth, not much older than you. It might not look like it, but this elder was quite a wastrel once. I ran away from home and went on an adventure. That was when I saw the Ivory City, and many other things. But eventually, I came back to this grove. There is nowhere better than home, I believe.
He thought for a few moments, and then said,
Why do you ask?
The young woman remained silent for a while.
I heard that there's an evil demon locked inside the tower, that the gods put her there as a punishment for her malevolence, corruption, and pride. Do you think it's true?
Sonny chuckled.
That. Sometimes I forget how much knowledge has been lost by us, the inhabitants of the Kingdom of Hope. Yes, young lady, there is indeed a demon imprisoned within the Ivory Tower. However, she was never evil, malevolent, or corrupt. In fact, Hope was very kind and generous to us humans.
The beauty shifted slightly.
Oh? Why did the gods punish her then?
Sonny sighed dejectedly.
That is the question, isn't it? Why destroy this land and put its kind lady in shackles? Who knows? If mortals like us could know the will of the gods, then maybe we'd be gods instead.
There it was again, the radiant flame in the young woman's chest. He wasn't imagining things, it was really there. Sonny was about to try and get a better look, uncaring of how improper such an attempt would seem. But at that moment, a dearly familiar voice came from behind him. He had never heard that voice sound so somber and grave. The Lady of the Grove said, "Why are you here, Solvain?"